Live.
Hello, welcome to Food Co-op Initiative's monthly webinar for startup food co-ops. Today's topic is all about raising money, member loan campaigns, and we have the wonderful Ben Sandell of CDS Consulting Co-op with us. But before I further introduce him, I just want to go through a few housekeeping things. You are right now listening to me, Susie Carter. I am the Director of Programs and Partnerships with Food Co-op Initiative. Behind the scenes, you can't see her, but we have the illustrious Rosie Weaver, who is the Resource Specialist for Food Co-op Initiative. She and I will be tracking your comments and your questions in the comment box under YouTube. And so to practice using the comment box and your way to ask questions throughout this webinar today is to make sure you're signed into YouTube. You can click through the link if you're currently on the Food Co-op Initiative website. And then in the comment box, you can go ahead and we could do a roll call. So it's great to see who's here today, who's joining us. If you want, just go ahead, type your name, your co-op, or if you don't yet have a co-op, maybe the city where you're joining us from, so we can all see who's here and say hello. So go ahead, give that a test now. All right. So the way that we're structuring this webinar is it's going to be a little bit shorter than what you're used to. We're going to stick to about 15-20 minutes of content from Ben, and then we'll move to a question and answer period. So if you can go ahead and type your questions throughout the webinar. We'll probably hold most of them till the end, and then Ben will share even more of his knowledge with us. All right, so speaking of man of the hour, Ben Sandell. He is a consultant with CDS Consulting Co-op. He specializes in board leadership, development, and capital campaigns. And he works with dozens of startups and established food co-ops across the U.S. and sometimes even Canada. Ben also, we had the good fortune of working together on a startup in Harrisonburg, Virginia. Ben was the board president from inception through opening for Friendly City Food Co-op. This co-op opened in 2011. Sales are above projections and is doing quite well. He was a key part of this development team and was a critical part of its member loan campaign, which he will be discussing today. CDS Consulting Co-op is a value partner in food co-op development with us, and if you'd like to learn more about their 4 and 3 development program for startups, you can visit cdsconsulting.coop. And one more housekeeping thing, if you are keeping notes, please don't worry about writing down the information from each slide. We will be able to share the full slides with you at foodcoopinitiative.coop/slides. So, without further ado, welcome Ben.
Thanks very much, Susie and Rosie and Food Co-op Initiative for having me here today. And thank you all out there who are watching. So we're going to talk today about capital campaigns, and we look at capital campaigns in 2 different parts, the planning and the implementation. Today we're just going to be talking about the planning phase, and we're going to be using a theater theme for today's presentation. So in keeping with that, let's get on with the show. So next slide, Rosie. Every great show starts with a really good story, and your co-op definitely has or is in the process of writing a really good story. And that story has 3 acts. That's your co-op's story of why and how you are starting a co-op, why it is important to raise money from members, and why this much money, and what are you going to use it for. Next slide, please. So your co-op's story should be second nature to you. If it isn't already, it will get that way. But first, you want to be able to talk about who are the people that are making this happen. You know, it is a team effort consisting of board, staff, and key volunteers, or maybe if you haven't yet transitioned to board, you're calling them the founding team or steering committee. But you need to be able to talk about who these people are, who they are in your community, and why they're doing this. And also, what have you done to get to this point? in larger strokes, that is, what are the milestones? What are the turning points that you have achieved? And also, what's the plan you're using? Hopefully, you're using the 4 cornerstones and 3 stages model of co-op development. It's one that is proven that there's strong support for. But whatever your plan, you need to be able to articulate it quite clearly. And of course, if you have an end statement or a vision for your co-op, you need to be able to articulate that well too. Okay, next slide, please. Your capital campaign story is another really key piece and a great part of your story. It's really important to think about your capital campaign not as a chore or as a hurdle that needs to be overcome, but it's another way that your co-op can serve its members even before the store opens. So that idea that your co-op is already here in your community doing stuff even before you get the doors of the actual store open. And people want really great stuff to do with their money. They're hungry for it. They really do want that, and you are providing that to them. There are very few really great options where people can invest their money locally in something they believe in and in something where they know that their money is not going for a lot of overhead and to support a larger infrastructure, but it's actually going straight into things they can see. Our co-op investments do allow that, so our co-op loans and preferred share programs. And of course, it's principle 3, members' economic participation, so you're also supporting, you're also following your own cooperative principles by doing this. Perfect. Another aspect of why this is such a great part of the story is that co-ops are associations and business enterprises together. They build connections in the community and are mission-driven, and they also build community prosperity and put ownership and money in the hands of your community, in their wages, in payments to local vendors, and in many other ways. So it's another great part of the capital campaign story is this entrepreneurship and association combination. And then there's your financial story, which should be centered around your pro forma, that shows that you've done your homework, that you know what your financial need is. There can be no fuzzy goals as you're going into your capital campaign. You can't say, well, we hope to raise $600,000 or maybe $700,000. You need to know exactly how much money you need to raise for this. How much is going to come from first position? How much is going to be coming from your members? How much is going to be coming from member equity and other sources? It's really important for you to be able to define that financial need. Plus, the pro forma will be part of the documentation that you will be producing during the planning stage of your capital campaign. So moving on to the legal questions, if you were putting on a show, you would have to get legal clearance. You would have to pay your royalties so that you could use the scripts legally. Well, you need to do your legal work also for your capital campaign. You need a good lawyer. If you don't already have one, you need one who's experienced in your state's co-op laws and in securities, because these kind of offerings to these loan or preferred share offerings are considered securities by most state governments and the federal government. You need to check and potentially revise your bylaws, your articles of incorporation, or even your incorporation status, depending on what your lawyer says and what your state requires, again, so that you can legally raise money in these fashions. There are a number of options and restrictions that you can use and that you have to abide by. At the end of this, there's a page of links that includes a link to a University of Wisconsin webinar that does a really good job of describing many of the exemptions and restrictions that you have to work within and can take advantage of in your capital campaign. And state rules do vary, so make sure to check first. Of course, it's great to get information from other co-ops on what they've done, but if they're not in your state, you need to check to make sure that it will pass muster in your state. And you need to leave a lot of time for this. Legal investigation can take quite a while, so I suggest starting this at least 3 months before you plan to kick off the implementation phase of your capital campaign. A few states even require you to register these campaigns and get state approval, like New York State does. So again, you need to build that time into the process. In thinking about member loans and preferred shares, there's pluses and minuses to both of them. Loans tend to be the more familiar vehicle since, of course, many of us have credit cards, car loans, and mortgages, and they make financial planning for the general manager and staff quite straightforward because there's a clear payback date and interest rate associated with them. So they can put that into their financial planning quite effectively. And they may be a little easier to sell because of that straightforwardness and familiarity. However, loans also show up as debt on your financial statements, so they're not as helpful in that regard. Whereas preferred shares, or C shares as they're sometimes called, show up as equity. So they're better for your bottom line in that regard. They also give board and operations more control over when you may choose to allow repurchase of those shares and if or when you pay dividends on those shares. They may be a little more challenging to sell, but there are reasons to consider even potentially doing a combined campaign, kind of like a dramedy, where you got comedy and drama mushed together. But be aware that trying to do them both at the same time, next slide please, trying to do both a member loan campaign and a preferred share campaign definitely adds complexity to the story and to the workload. It increases paperwork and legal costs, and also is going to add burden to the operations. And keep in mind, you're raising the money now, but your general manager and staff are the ones who are going to have to manage all of these and pay them all back, do the annual reporting to all of the members who've made loans or purchased preferred shares. So do think about them in this also. And whatever you choose carefully. Keep everything very well organized and document everything. So after you've got your story in place and you've done your legal work, you need to find the right people for each role in this production. And you need to be very clear with roles and accountability. You know, a director of a play does not assume there are enough people to get everything done. He or she gets the names of everyone, writes them down, keeps close track, makes sure everyone knows exactly what they're doing, when they're doing it, and where they're supposed to be. And you need to do the same thing for everyone involved with your capital campaign. You may need to pay some people for their expertise, especially in the legal and financial arenas, and potentially for help with the capital campaign itself. And as you're recruiting these things, make sure these people for these positions, make sure not to underestimate the amount of time it's going to take. It will take a lot. Next slide. And of course, every show needs its needs the folks who are going to provide early financial support, so that others who come later feel more confident to loan or to purchase shares. And at least 10 to 15% of your total capital campaign goal needs to come from these pre-commitments. Ignore that 10 to 15% at your peril or at the peril of your capital campaign. This needs to be from your inner circle, so it would be from your board or steering committee, some of the key volunteers, and your very strongest supporters. The further out you go from that core group, the higher the percentage needs to be, because now you'll be pulling money that would have come in during the implementation phase. So be very careful and work very hard with that. And I understand that co-op folks are often of modest means. You know, they are mission-driven people who maybe have spent a lot of time doing great things in the world, but not necessarily making themselves wealthy. But now is the time to embrace your entrepreneurial spirit and tighten your belts. Forgo buying that new car this year. Have a staycation this year instead of flying somewhere. You need to be involved in this pre-commitment level. If you're watching this now, you are one of those people who needs to be involved at the pre-commitment level. If you can't show that your inner circle is fully committed to this capital campaign, including financially, you will have a very hard time convincing your members to financially commit. And every good show needs sets and lighting and costumes and sound and makeup and all that great stuff. Well, you have versions of these in the form of your systems, processes, documents, and schedules. And like in a good show, you need to know who is accountable for what, when, and you need these things documented so people know what they're doing, who they interact with, and when things need to happen. And you can see here, this is a list of probably the bigger things that have to be done, some that are internal, so therefore your team's use to keep track of everything and understand what's going on. Some are external. They're going to go to your members. For them, they may be required or they may be marketing pieces, but there's a lot to do and they need to be done in a timely fashion. Let's move to the next slide. And of course, you have to figure out when you're going to roll this thing out. Capital campaigns don't tend to work in the summer or in the Thanksgiving through New Year's period. So schedule your implementation accordingly and do all your planning period accordingly. If possible, the absolute best the best time to schedule this would be in the spring or early fall and in conjunction with the announcement of you signing a lease with contingencies. Using that leverage of those contingencies can be a great driver for getting people to financially support their co-op. Being able to say, we have signed a lease with contingencies on this awesome space in our wonderful downtown. However, if we do not raise this much money by this date, we are not going to be able to move forward with building out this beautiful location. So that can be a really good way to drive people to be financially involved, to make their loans or purchase their shares. And a great promotional strategy with advance work is definitely a part of any successful production. You do need to use extra care in capital campaign communications and promotions because these are considered private offerings and there are rules that prohibit you from making too direct an appeal to anyone who is not a member of your co-op. But nevertheless, you need to have strong and timely communications in order to build momentum and excitement that are critical to success. And there's more information on all of this in the Member Loan Toolbox, which is in our link at the end, which also is applicable for preferred shares. I want to note now, too, given what time it is, that we are going to be taking questions and questions at the end. And there's often a little bit of a lag time with this Google thing. So if you want to start typing your questions in now, when we wrap up the content part of this, we'll have them and be ready to answer them and make sure that they get answered on this same call, on this same webinar. So moving on to the next slide. No production happens without rehearsals. Everything needs to be checked. You need to make sure all of your players are fully committed and ready to go. When you see a great play or movie, those actors and actresses, they're not doing just the minimum required to get by. They are committed and fully engaged. Your team needs to be that way too. And if you find as you're doing these final checks and checking in with people, anyone who may be reluctant, anyone who feels I'm not so comfortable talking about money, that's totally great. Give them another role in the campaign, and find someone else to take if they're in a lead role or if they're in a caller role, find someone else to take that role over. Caller training needs to occur so that the callers feel confident and skilled in what their job is, and you've got to practice, practice, practice. Calling each other, call your family, make a lot of practice calls so that by the time you start talking to the members of your co-op, you're skilled and ready and confident to do a good job. And something I want to just put out there at this point is that money is a very loaded issue that can generate lots of strong feelings. Some folks involved with co-ops may feel like maybe money plays too strong a role in our world, and maybe they're right. But for your capital campaign to be successful, everyone needs to be fully behind the financial goal, the process, and the methods. Talk this through as a group. Make sure everyone can strongly support this critical, exciting, and mutually beneficial part of your co-op development. These quotes show that there are a lot of different feelings about money out there. Work this through first. You do not want to get into the implementation phase and find that some of your group is not fully committed to this work. There are lots of places to turn for help through this process. Food Co-op Initiative is one of them, as is CDS Consulting Co-op. And there's a whole bunch of materials, which are shown on the next slide, that are available to you, including articles on member loans and on preferred stock offerings, the member loan toolbox, which, as I've said, is also applicable to preferred share campaigns, and that great webinar on legal issues and alternative equity strategies for cooperatives, which should be able to answer a lot of questions and point you in a lot of directions towards what are the potential avenues under which you can raise member loans and sell preferred shares. So that is a very fast overview of the planning phase of a capital campaign for your co-op. Now I think I'll turn it back to Susie to start with your questions. And thank you again.
It's that easy, Ben. All right. Can you hear me, Ben?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, great. We have some questions rolling in. Good call on asking for those in advance. Okay, so we have one question here from Linda. Should we have a capital campaign before or after our feasibility study?
Well, feasibility work, it's a great question. Feasibility work is going to be ongoing, so it's not done just once and then it's over, but you need to have you need to begin your financial feasibility, which would include your pro forma, before you do your capital campaign. You need to do that to know what your financial need is, and so that you can make a case for the viability of your store, or the potential viability of your store. So in the 4 cornerstones and 3 stages model, you would be planning your capital campaign in stage 2B, and which means that you would have already done your market study to show whether there's market feasibility. You would have done your pro forma, including the sources and uses, to show whether you have financial feasibility. You're always looking for to check your internal capacity and see how you're doing in that regard. And if you have some sites identified, you may be also working on the site feasibility or the construction feasibility. So I guess the short answer to that question is definitely get your feasibility work underway before moving into the capital campaign.
Great, thorough response, Ben. And for anybody who's not familiar with the 4 and 3 development model that Ben mentioned, you can find that on our website at foodcoopinitiative.coop. We have questions just pouring in. This is great. Okay, so next, Heather here with Manchester. Hello. Question.
Hi, Heather.
What are you using or planning to use for tracking software to document everything along the way?
The tracking software there's a wide range in what groups are doing out there, although many of them are just using homemade, fairly basic tools, often based on some of the Google spreadsheets, or using Google as the platform to store all their spreadsheets and documents. Some groups are more versed in using some of the commercially available online systems, like Susie, help me out. I'm blanking on the name of the one that many groups use.
Oh, Nation Builder.
Yes, Nation Builder. Those are great as long as you have the skills. I don't think I would suggest starting to use Nation Builder at the point of your capital campaign planning, but if you've been using that all along for tracking your prospects and your members, then it could be a great tool for tracking the capital campaign.
You had mentioned Google, so Google Apps, Google Spreadsheets.
Yep.
Would you recommend that? I know some people have questions around safety and security with sensitive information. How do you feel about that?
I don't have a great opinion either way. I think that you can make the Google apps reasonably secure, and if your option is that versus having it on someone's personal computer, I would say Google's just as secure as that, maybe more so, and gives you the ability to have good backups also. So I guess I'm very comfortable with using those kind of online apps.
Great. I think the big thing to point out too is that you don't necessarily need anything fancy to do this tracking.
Absolutely right. Yep.
Great, great. Okay, next. Heidi here from BizMan. We are just starting our pre-planning for our capital campaign and plan on implementing in early September. How soon would you recommend we begin securing pre-commitments?
You can secure pre-commitments right away, and in fact, it may not be a bad idea to do that now, which is really early in the process, but you may, after doing the first round, look at that and total up what you have and look at that in comparison to what your overall need is and decide whether you want to do another round, whether you want to either ask those same people to dig deeper and have larger pre-commitments, or if you want to extend it out just a little bit further. But remember, every time you choose to extend that pre-commitment level further out from your very main core group, you want to increase the percentage because now you're beginning to take money that would have come in during the implementation phase. So I don't think you can really start too early. You do want to know what your financial need is. However, it's very helpful to be able to tell people, if our financial need is $1 million, we're hoping to raise $150,000 in pre-commitments, so that they understand. When you ask for pre-commitments, you always make it clear that, of course, they will get to see all the documentation and paperwork before they actually have to write a check. And if for some reason they're unsatisfied with that paperwork, these pre-commitments are not binding, but you certainly hope that everyone will fulfill their pre-commitments.
Great, great. All right, so we have Thomas here from Northeast Community Food Co-op in Aurora, Colorado. Great. And we are preparing to have a crowdfunding campaign to pay for initial consulting expenses, which is prior to our member campaign in the fall. Do you have any advice on best practices, and is it important to differentiate this effort from an actual member loan campaign that will come later?
I think it is very important to differentiate this from a member loan campaign because I think for the most part you cannot use crowdsourcing for member loan campaigns. They're private offerings, thus they can't be done online and open to the whole world. So I think you need to make a very clear distinction.
Great, which actually really dovetails nicely with our next question regarding the private offering rules. How does Facebook and social media play into the private offering rules? And I'm guessing to follow up, how we can do our communications when we're trying to promote the campaign.
Yes, you need to be very careful with your communications, and one of the few hard, fast rules is you cannot make any direct appeals in any avenue that's open to the public. So, in other words, you cannot have you cannot say, make your loan now on Facebook, period. You cannot do it. However, how far you can go, to some degree, depends on the tolerance of your lawyer. If your lawyer feels it's okay to say, we are in the midst of our exciting member capital campaign, check here for more information. If they're okay with that, that's okay. But some will say that even saying check here for more information may get close to that line of improper. So if in doubt, I think you can certainly talk about this in the context of here's part of the plan for our cooperative development. We've done all this work up to now. Right now we're doing this capital campaign, and when we're done with that, we're going on to the next part of our development process. So talking about that this is happening, absolutely, but telling people where they can get more information, or maybe getting close to the line and asking people to be a part of the capital campaign is going over the line.
Mm-hmm. Two follow-up questions I have for you, Ben. Then, how do you feel about updates on social media to say, we're 2/3 of the way in our member loan campaign? Does that cross the line?
I have to say it depends. I generally think it does not, that you're okay doing that. Again, as long as it's a very carefully worded message saying, exciting times here at the co-op, we're in the midst of our capital campaign, and we are 2/3 of the way towards our goal, and leaving it at that. If you say, help us get there, or spread the word, you're probably crossing the line at that point. So as long as you word it carefully, you should be okay. But I really, really want to stress: check with your lawyer. It can be a good idea to run all the ways that you're going to communicate past your lawyer and make sure that they're comfortable with that, given whatever exemptions or rules that you're operating your capital campaign under.
Great. And one question that we often get at Food Co-op Initiative that wasn't asked yet is, why do so many co-ops have a minimum loan amount, and what is that amount that you're seeing these days?
Sure. You have to have some kind of minimum loan amount, partly because it is a lot of work to do a capital campaign, especially a successful one. And when I would say that $1,000 should be the absolute minimum, and $2,000 may be ideal, but I would not even consider going anything under $1,000, because the work that will be involved to manage a campaign that takes any loans below that, or any preferred share purchases below that, will become very, very high, and it becomes extremely hard to meet your financial goal. What I would say, though, because it's very common for groups to feel like, well, we're in a modest community, not a lot of wealth, I don't think we can swing that. You do have to go into these with a certain amount of confidence that the money is there in your community, and it is. Almost any community. And I can tell you from the perspective of someone who we raised ultimately almost $3 million from our owners in a community of under 50,000 people of pretty modest income and education levels. So the money is there. The money is definitely there. Go into it with confidence and don't have a minimum anywhere. Make sure that your minimum is at least $1,000.
Great. All right. Well, I don't see any more questions in the comment box. I'm sure this is a lot for us to take in all at once. So if you do have follow-up questions, you can reach Ben directly at Ben Sandell at cdsconsulting.coop. And you can also reach Food Co-op Initiative at info@fci.coop, and obviously find this webinar on our website. Ben, is there anything else you'd like to add before we leave?
Just that this can be a really exciting, thrilling part of your development process, especially since when successful, it leads to build out and a lot of great things happening, and ultimately your store opening. So go forward and raise money and provide another awesome service to your members.
Fantastic. And I could definitely reiterate that. I think that was some of the most fun that I had working on our Food Co-op startup, was being a part of the member loan campaign, because of all the energy that it creates within your organization and your community. And it really becomes real once that campaign is complete. So find us next month for our next installment of startup webinars, and that is going to be actually out of schedule. We typically offer our webinars the second Tuesday of the month. This one was going to be on Tuesday, June 24th, since we'll be enjoying CCMA a couple weeks before then. So June 24th, same time, and we'll be joined by Green Top Grocery for membership building with events. Ben, thanks again for this fantastic webinar, and we'll be hopefully talking to everyone at home soon. Thanks.
Sounds good. Bye, everybody.